Well, hello. I think we're live. Welcome. I guess I'm the first talk of the day. Heck on. Good morning, everyone in Norway. It's 9 in the morning there, and it's midnight here in San Diego. So let me go ahead and get my presentation up for you. Alrighty. All right. So today we'll be talking about how to vet your vendors. If anybody's been paying attention to the news as of late, I think several of these may look particularly familiar. All three of these organizations are vendors for other companies, and all three of them demonstrated basically levels of gross incompetence. And that gross incompetence caused a lot of problems for their customers downstream. So today we'll be talking about how to not be in the line of fire, so to speak. Let's see. Right, so a little bit about me. I'm one of the two founders of a little company in America called Phobos Group. We founded in 2016, and we have been doing all sorts of interesting custom work since then. I have personally spent times on both red and blue teams. I've worked for Twitter, Fair Isaac, Rapid7, British Telecom, the power company here in San Diego. I've spent time in the finance sector and software, social media. I've been asked to be in several documentaries, and I was a consultant for the 4th season of Mr. Robot. Most of my time is spent being very profane on Twitter, and I openly call out compliance for being silly and not getting anything done. So that being said, you guys are here for the meat, as it were, and not so much me. So moving on, right now, at least in America, the way that most businesses do vendor risk assessments is to basically send them a spreadsheet and ask politely, hey, can you answer all of these questions that are in this spreadsheet? And what the what the company tends to do is fill it with lies or fill it with technical jargon or compliance language and send it back. And in large part, it makes the compliance people and the insurance people happy, but it does absolutely nothing for security at all. So yeah, we send them a spreadsheet and they fill it with lies, and somehow we think that this is okay. So how do we fix that, right? So understanding that like this is done essentially to make business people feel better about either, in some cases, acquiring a company. Like if you've ever done like mergers and acquisitions, procedurally, it's very similar. Like you want to identify what kind of risk you're going to be dealing with or grappling with by either doing business with a company or, in the case of a merger and acquisitions, by like gluing together infrastructure, right? So largely it is compliance and insurance related, but does that even matter if nobody's following the advice? And in many cases, businesses employ the use of what are called risk acceptance forms. And risk acceptance forms, for anyone that is unfamiliar with the idea, is essentially you have like multiple business units inside of a company, and business unit A wants to do a thing, and maybe that's move from Campfire to HipChat, or maybe move from Cisco wireless networking equipment to Aruba or something. So they will put together like a proposal to say, here's what we want to do and here's how we want to do it. And then group B, which may be a governance group or an IT group or security group, will look at that request and say, well, we don't think that this is safe. We've done an evaluation on HipChat and we've discovered that all of their stuff is kept in completely open S3 buckets. So there's no privacy, and any attachments you upload are going to be publicly accessible. And this is bad news because we're a security company and we trade lots of documents with people who would really not like it if we shared all their stuff to the public. And group A says, okay, thank you for your assessment. We're going to fill out this form that we accept the risk if anything bad happens, which effectively sort of defeats the entire purpose, right? There's a lot of that at the power company where folks would say, we want to do a thing. And the security department would say, no, that's a bad thing. You shouldn't do that thing. And they say, well, lol, risk accepted. So it's kind of a running joke. I'm not 100% sure how prevalent that is outside of America, but in America, it's kind of a joke among security people to laugh about the whole risk acceptance concept. So how do we get over that hurdle? How do we grapple with that problem? Well, we do it ourselves. And the best way for us to get a good idea of what to expect from a vendor is if we do the work ourselves, And there's a lot of material that exists today for doing the work ourselves. Obviously far beyond just sending them a spreadsheet and asking them please not to lie into it. So amusingly, the whole bug bounty crowd has the right kind of idea, which is sort of this light, fast, gather as much intel, do as much footprinting and perimeter analysis as you possibly can. You don't necessarily need to break into anything. Your job isn't to find pages and pages of CVE references or, technical jargon as it relates to specific exploits, but just to get an idea of, is this risky or not? Like, do we trust this company to be part of our network or to get documents from us or to handle customer data or whatever the vendor is doing? Like, your job is to identify, do we trust them based on our research? And herein we explain maybe sending them a spreadsheet and asking them politely not to lie into it isn't good enough. So we're gonna do it ourselves. So normally, at least in my experience, when I have been tapped to do these vendor risk assessments, I get a very short window of opportunity. 4 days is long, and in most cases, like mergers and acquisitions and vendor risk assessments, averages 2 or 3 days. So you basically have 2 or 3 days. And this is like in addition to your normal work. So if you're a blue teamer, or you're on the SOC, or you're on the internal red team, whatever, you have your normal day-to-day work. They pile this on you in addition to all the normal stuff you do. So you don't even get 2 or 3 full days. You get 2 or 3 days until they expect the results, and you're expected to somehow squeeze all that work in between your normal stuff. So you don't get a lot of time. So you can't go super deep. You just need to go as wide and as colorful as you possibly can. Generally speaking, that means you're looking at the company's perimeter, like almost in an exclusivity. Is you're doing some very basic scanning work. You're doing some very, very basic vuln type stuff. Maybe you're sweeping, like in America, they have a thing called, what's it called? EDGAR. There's a thing called EDGAR. It's an acronym. And EDGAR is a website that part of the government runs that lets you go and look up business records. And you can see what the business's official name is and where their official address is and phone numbers and contact information, when they were registered, the names of the people that registered them, the size of the company, that sort of thing. And depending on the size of the company, if the company is publicly traded, you can get like executive salaries and stuff like that. So you can do a whole bunch of interesting soft work there to look up sort of who they are behind the scenes, like what the structure of the business is like, how many shares exist, all that sort of stuff. You can find a variety of different types of assets that exist on the internet, and that's largely my bag, doing perimeter discovery and doing asset discovery. And then you can look for, if you can identify people that work there, you can get a good idea of sort of who they are, what the culture of the business is like, because in many, many cases, you're going to see like social media, you're going to see like food type posts. Like, I'm not sure if you folks use Yelp out there, but like, here you can look up like Foursquare and Yelp and other places where you can go and like review restaurants. You can like find people's reviews of stuff. But again, not super deep. Your intention is just to see like how risky this place is. So here's some really good sort of jumping off points, right? Twitter, Reddit, Google dorking. Oh boy, a lot of time on Shodan. I've spent a lot of time. Shodan Census, archive.org. Census is great if you want to look up like SSL certificate stuff. Like if you want to see, like one really, really fun one is to see if you can find all the companies' SSL certs, and then look for stuff like intranet, internal, LAN, .local, like any stuff that is going to leak what's behind the scenes. GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, those are fantastic. Source code, you'll find things like shared secrets. You'll find probably in some cases usernames or code that shouldn't be public. It can go a lot of different ways. Leak data is a good one. There's lots of leaks that happen all the time. And if you find people's credentials in that leaked data, then something to consider is, is this organization openly letting their employees sign up to like weird forums on the internet with their corporate email addresses? And are they doing password reuse? That's where that comes in interesting. And then Parler, the big, the news here. That crazy Nazi social media site got completely turned inside out like a gym sock. And some really clever guys figured out that they could get 70 terabyte of data. So there's 70 terabyte of Parler leak data. So now you can investigate your vendors to see if they have any Nazis on board. So that's probably an important thing to know if you're going to give them any data, is to get an idea of who they are, right? So some colorful sort of, sometimes it's really easy. Like, you know, you go on Shodan, you look for you see if you can find their infrastructure, you look for port 445. Is it open? Oh my God, why? You get, you know, poorly configured web servers that leak like somebody's .ssh directory, or, you know, you have, as I mentioned, SSL certs that have interesting key phrases and words in them, like internal or LAN or localhost, and that sort of stuff. Sometimes it's really easy, and you can very quickly say, oh, well, maybe we should reconsider trusting these people with our data. But it varies, right? So it depends on who the vendor is and what they're doing, and do they have access to your office? And there's all these other questions, right? So to some degree, what we're doing is we're sort of building a third-party threat model where if you can, the concept here is we're trying to build a threat model for this vendor to get an idea of who would attack them and what their threats could potentially be, to extrapolate from there, how do those threats potentially affect us, right? So here's some pointers to look for. This is a good time to grab a screenshot. Is anything that's unpatched, social media profiles, ports, you know, internal, like Google dorking for documents, PDFs, docx, doc files. A lot of people will post pictures of like company events, like big company parties, to places like Flickr or Instagram. In a lot of cases, like in Instagram, for example, it may still be alive. They may have killed it, but there used to be a map. You could go on Instagram and find like a map of a place and look for all the posts that came from that place. So, for example, if you are familiar with a secret government building, and you want to know if anybody who works in the secret government building is probably posting stuff they shouldn't be posting, then there are several places that you can visit that you can like sort of drag a map over that secret government building and hit like re-render or what have you, and it will show you like, oh, here's a bunch of posts of people posting like from the bathroom or whatever. Anything with GPS is really good, but the idea here is you want to see how leaky they are, right? Previously in other security engagements that we've done at Phobos, this is actually a very amusing and interesting thing to do, because like one engagement we were on, we discovered that the company is a really, really dog friendly company. Like almost every post that we found on Instagram from this place had dogs. So our phishing campaign involved inventing a fake regulatory company that was going to come in and investigate whether people were allowed to still have their dogs in the office or not. And one of the best ways to get people to click on stuff is to tell them you're going to take their dog away. I'm a cat person myself, but oh boy, you get people mad and they click on things. So fun stuff to remember. Not necessarily saying that you should do this to your vendors, but you know, something you can keep in your pocket if they tell you that it's okay. Because in some cases, you basically say, look, we have to run this assessment on you guys to see sort of what we're in for. And in some cases, that they will perceive that to be like a free security assessment. And they'll say, yeah, go nuts, do whatever. Just can you give us a report at the end? And sometimes you have to give that report to them and be like, well, here's one page of data. You're not going to like anything on here. But yeah, here it is. So fun times there. There you go. So it is a lot of work to do by hand, like quite a lot of work to do by hand, because we're talking about 2 or 3 days of just doing this manual sort of searching and scanning and sweeping and all that fun stuff. So in our case, what we did at Phobos is we automated. We built a tool. And if anybody that's familiar with me on Twitter has seen me screaming about it the last month or so, we released it in December. It's called Orbital, and this is a screenshot of some of the output where you can see that this is the sort of stuff that we think is important, right? If you aim this at, for example, a vendor, you'll see, oh, look, they have IIS 8.5, like, and they have WordPress 2.4. Like, what are you doing? Why is this online? And you have like 9 MS SQLs and RDP and 445 exposed to the internet. Like, you see this sorts of stuff, and you're like, well, you're who again? Oh, you're our accountants. You're supposed to be taking all of our financial data that has all of the records of how much our customers pay us, and we're supposed to trust you with that data, that you're going to keep it safe. And this is what your perimeter looks like? Right? So it's the way to parse this, at least the way that I compute it in my head, is generally speaking, in like 9 out of 10 cases, the people that maintain the computers and equipment and network infrastructure that touches the internet of any given company are the same people that work on the hosts inside the network. So like, if there are problems on the perimeter, there's going to be problems in the network. So you can expect that if this is what their perimeter looks like, the rest of the network is going to look the same. There are some circumstances where that's not the case. Like maybe you have one team that does nothing but the publicly accessible infrastructure and other teams that do only internal stuff. But generally speaking, those people are in the same department. They sit next to each other. So if one group of people is really, really, really good at security, chances are good that the people that sat next to them aren't going to be terrible at security, because the first group of people will like quietly disappear them, I guess. So that being the case, we have to do basic threat modeling. Who is this vendor? What are they going to be doing for you? What data are you going to let them have access to? What will they be doing with that data? What happens if they have an insider threat? And what happens if that person has access to your network or your data? Will they have access to your office or your data center? Put your bad guy hat on. Imagine that you were this vendor, and imagine that you wanted to do damage to, your company. What would you do? Like write all that down, because that is now your new threat model. Like just come up with stuff like Hollywood stuff, because some of it is real. Like think of ways you can break things, and think of ways you can be the bad guy, because that's very useful information. And if you're clever, then you're going to come up with stuff that's more interesting than real bad guys would, which means you're going to end up ahead of the game. So consider doing a tabletop exercise. So what scenario would you invent that would involve this vendor? Could they introduce ransomware to your network? Could they blackmail people at your company? What could you do to deal with it if it happened? And how would you recover from that if it happened? Are there boundaries or contingencies that are stopping you from being able to act in the event of something terrible happening? Do you have a disaster recovery plan or a backup plan if something terrible happens involving a vendor who has access to some data, right? Do you have a crisis management plan? Like what happens if you get Sony pictured? What happens if the attackers decide that you're releasing a movie that they don't like and they install wiper malware on every workstation in your office, and they pull the trigger and your entire office caves in? Like, what happens? What do you do at that point? Like, can you prevent it? What happens if you can't? Like, do you have a plan B? And then to that end, like, what if your first plan fails? If you've come up with a crisis management plan or a disaster recovery plan, and for some reason you can't pull the trigger on that, what do? Do you have a plan B? Is there another plan? Like, how do you exercise that, right? So these are all these questions that come up with, within the periphery of this sort of relationship between your company and some random unnamed vendor. How do you deal with this sort of stuff? So ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to make a go, no-go decision, right? You have to decide how do you proceed? Do you accept the risks that are presented by the vendor, if there are any? What happens if you turn in your report and the business says, I don't care? How do you move forward from there? Given the things that you've learned about the vendor, do you think that the risk is too high or not? Do you feel better or worse about the vendor after having investigated them? So essentially the nuts and bolts are this. Like, this is essentially the TLDR, is that you have to understand the implications before deciding whether or not to allow this vendor to do whatever it is that's being asked, right? In many cases, these vendors tend to be folks that will, like SolarWinds is a really good example, is their solution involves installing a piece of software on a server in your infrastructure, and then that server sits in a privileged position. The service is almost certainly running as some authenticated user, in some cases a domain admin if you're in a Windows environment, and that piece of software in many cases can talk to lots of other machines strewn about your environment. What happens if that thing goes bad? And ordinarily, the sort of responses that you'd get to that sort of question from executives and leadership will be like, well, that never happens. There's no record of that. It's the chances are so low, or it would never happen to us, right? So, and it's your position generally, if your scope of work is to do these sorts of assessments, it's part of your job to say, well, we should consider, even if it's 0.1% of a chance, we should still consider what we should do in the event that it happens, because at the worst, we've spent some time, but we're prepared, as opposed to being FireEye, I guess, who was not prepared to learn that their SolarWinds Orion server had been exfiltrating data from their network for like 9 months. So to that end, set up guardrails, right? So you want to make sure that if you have to install a thing in your environment and that thing has to live in a place and talk to other things in your environment, that you can tell when it starts to misbehave. And that's sort of a vague thing to say, only because you get more detail based on whatever it is that you're installing, depending whether it's hardware, whether it's software. Sometimes, like in the land of finance, you'll have financial networks that you have. Some company needs to talk to a credit card company, and they have a IPsec site-to-site link over MPLS where traffic can flow back and forth between their data center and your data center. So now you have essentially like an airlock to another environment that you have to deal with in terms of like what is allowed through it, what protocols can go through it, how are you tracking that, what happens if something misbehaves, how do you what do you do with the are you capturing logs from that VPN endpoint to see what is being denied? Because from very colorful personal experience, when you have firewall logs from a firewall that's dropping traffic that's outbound, like egress policy, right? So for example, you don't want port 445 talking to the internet, like at all, under any circumstance. So if for some reason your firewall is seeing some machine in your network trying to talk to the internet on port 445 and the firewall is dropping it, the chances are incredibly high that could be a phishing email that's trying to phone home creds, or it could be malware trying to phone home, or something to that effect. So it warrants investigation, right? Then making a triage plan, right? What do you do? What in plain, and I guess wouldn't be plain English if you're a NORI, would it? But as clearly as you can, like simple, very easy to follow steps for what happens in a given scenario. Like do this thing, implement this action plan, call this person, send these emails, what have you. Having some kind of plan is better than having no kind of plan, right? And this is also a really, really good opportunity to use, essentially, let me go back to the other slides, to use this as an opportunity to refine your red teams and your blue teams, right? So if you have folks working for you that, or with you, whose job it is to sort of feed and water all the security apparatuses within the organizations, feed and water the servers and workstations to make sure that they're happy, or pretend to be bad guys. Like if you have an internal red team, people pretending to be, mustache twirling evil people bent to do terrible things that'll make some people lose sleep. These sorts of scenarios are very valuable for training opportunities. So for example, I've been doing red team work since 2010. Yeah. So 11 years I've been doing red team work. Not once in my entire career ever has a premise for a red team assessment been that a vendor got compromised and that some evil people have flown in, are flowing into our network through a VPN connection from a credit card company, or like what happened to Target, where the HVAC company, the people that work on the air conditioning and the heating, came in and one of the people brought an infected laptop and plugged that infected laptop into the network, and the network was completely flat, and all the cash registers were Windows XP that were unpatched, because who patches cash registers? And the malware operators happened to get lucky and were live pivoting from the HVAC vendor to Target's network. Like, these aren't exercises that normally, I've never been part of one. If they exist, they might happen internally, but they're fairly risky because they tend to involve other companies, right? So, how do you go to a vendor and say, hey, you guys are supposed to be, the people that come in and work on our security cameras, but we want to do a security assessment that involves you and some of your staff and some of your, your potentially your leadership to run basically a simulation of what would happen if something happened to your company and attackers flowed in to us through you, right? Like, how do you start that conversation? You start the conversation by saying, well, we don't trust you, and we think that your security is crap, and we're worried about your security because we think it's crap, and we want to do this game, and the whole premise is that we think you're crap. So they probably won't take it well. I'm sure that there are better ways of phrasing it, but conceptually, it's an interesting thing. It caught a lot of people in America completely off guard because this isn't a thing we test for. Like I said, the whole premise of this presentation is that the existing way that people do this work today is that they send that security camera company a spreadsheet and they just cross their fingers and hope that that company doesn't just fill it with lies. And like an interesting thing that, on red team engagements we've done, we have found those spreadsheets. Like, our customer has another vendor, and that other vendor wants them to fill out one of these security questionnaires. So we're seeing these security questionnaires because they're like left on file shares somewhere. So it's really interesting. Like, the people that are tasked with doing this from a business perspective don't appear to be doing it for security reasons. They appear to be doing it entirely because their insurance carrier says that they have to, or that their compliance requisites say that they have to. And generally speaking, in those circumstances, when you encounter a thing that a company has to do, and the reason the company has to do that is because of compliance, they tend to do just that and nothing more. And in many cases, they'll try and get away with as much as they possibly can, up to and including murder if they can get away with it. So taking that into account, that's why you have days, maybe, 3-4 days here. Yeah, you get a couple of days to do the thing. You look at the perimeter, you look at some stuff you can find, you dig around, you see who works there, what do they like, who do they talk to, how do they behave on the internet, what's their perimeter look like, is it terrible, do we have anything to worry about? And that's effectively the job at the end of the day. The job is investigating, how, like, this is us, right? We're evil bad guys. How do we grapple with what we discover? So to that end, I have time, and I can probably do one live if you want to see like some live digging around on the internet to see sort of what we can discover. I have a bunch of time left over for Q&A. I ended up talking incredibly fast. But yeah, let's see here. I'm not sure if anybody's said anything in chat, but yeah, okay. Let's do one live. Right, okay, let's see what we can come up with. So let's see here. Maybe 1 sec to prepare. So let's start out really easy. Biggest company in Norway. Equinor. Cool. Okay, who's Equinor? No idea. They're an energy company in Norway. They're publicly traded. They're owned by the government of Norway. Their subsidiary is Statoil. Interesting. Okay, cool. So now we can say let's go to Shodan and let's just see if they have SSL certs with their name in it. Super simple, right? Let's just look for SSL certs first. Might take a moment. 219. They run F5s. They have QA boxes exposed to the internet. Oh boy. They have RDP IAM runner in Google Cloud with what? So an interesting point of fact, which I like to point this out a lot. Port 3389 RDP. RDP is actually wrapped inside of SSL. And if you look at the extended SSL cert details, you'll see the fully qualified name inside of the network of what that machine calls itself. And if this machine was part of a domain, this name would be its fully qualified internal name inside of the domain. So this is one of the reasons that you will find myself and other folks screaming, like, under no circumstance do you let RDP touch the internet. That's bad. Run away. 10,000 tends to be webmin, port 10,000. Be interesting. I would not be entirely surprised if webmin was exposed. Azure, Kestrel, Teams. Interesting. So they have a Teams instance, I guess. No. But yeah, so we can see who they get their certs from and what they're running behind the scenes. In a lot of cases, actually, this is a really fun one that I like to do. Hopefully that's not too small. There. What is it? Equinor.com. Okay, so Shodan domain Equinor.com. One of the things that Shodan does, which is really nice, is it keeps track of subdomains. So with a single command line, you can get an idea of, oh boy, all the stuff they run. What can we learn about Equinor today? Well, they use Adobe, they use Apple, they use Workplace, they have SPF records, and they have PeopleClick, and SPF, that tells me that they use Office 365. They use Atlassian stuff, which suggests that we might be able to find Jira and Confluence. Not sure what that is. Centuries, that'd be interesting. Facebook domain verification, if they're doing something there. A lot of dashboard, shared, shared. Oh boy. I'm betting that this is going to be a whole lot of stuff that shouldn't be connected to the internet. Access it. Yeah. Statoil's RM. So yeah, they have a subsidiary called Statoil, and they're connected to them in some capacity. They use a lot of Azure. They have a lot of dev and API stuff exposed to the internet. That's a no-no. Interesting thing about dev and test and QA stuff, playground, exposed to the internet is, generally speaking, in many circumstances, that's, you can there. Stuff that's labeled as QA and test and all that fun stuff tends not to be in the SIM. In many cases, these things aren't sending logs anywhere. So if you're on a red team and you find something like this, you can pretty much assume you can beat the crap out of it and nobody will notice unless you accidentally knock it over, because who reads the logs from test and dev, right? And in many cases, again, if we're talking about, this is Azure, so the chances are pretty high there is some kind of Active Directory or shared authentication or single sign-on, something like that going on, based purely on the fact that we can tell they're using Azure like a lot, and we can tell that they're using Office 365. So the chances are pretty high that you can pop one of these, you have creds. And if you have creds, then you kind of have everything. CloudFront, that's fun. CloudFront is a good one because you can you can use CloudFront for domain fronting. So Australia.equinor.com you can ostensibly use for domain fronting if you want. If you impregnate them with malware and you want the malware to phone home and you want to get past the blue team, you use this as your domain front. And they think for some reason that Australia.equinor.com has become particularly popular in the course of a day. Yeah, canaries, that could be interesting. CCTV. Oh, so their cameras are probably online. We can get into their camera system. That'd be fun. But again, like light, fast, you can't go super deep. You only got a couple of days to do this. And this is a particularly long result. This is a massive organization. Document stuff. And this is all we're looking for. All we're looking at is subdomains. Oh, Git, GitLab. Oh, I want some code. Grafana, graphs for stuff. Fantastic. Even better. I.love. It goes to Azure website. So they have interesting. They have a subdomain that's a CNAME that points at Azure because they love Azure. Cool. What else we got? IOC test. I'm not 100% sure what that could. Oh, Kibana. Great. If you can get in there, you can ostensibly completely hide forever for life. You just stop all the logging for the machines that you gain access to. Mobile network. Some of these things get really colorful and interesting because you'll find like internal IP address space, NPM. Oh, I wonder if they had that left pad problem. Oh. Password. Great. Fantastic. Learning stuff. Please remove QR. Please remove web QR prod. So what this tells me is that one group of people does stuff and another group of people handles DNS names. And apparently those people don't talk often enough. So here we have like publicly accessible QA hosts and dev hosts that are like, please remove me, and they haven't removed them. So there's a lot. So that tells me that's another really interesting thing from a security perspective in terms of like, how do you pit parts of the company against itself is, well, we just learned that one group manages DNS and another group does something else inside of Azure, and they're different people because they're asking each other to do things through DNS names. That should tell you a little bit about how the communications work inside the company. A lot of remote stuff. I would imagine that if all their infrastructure is in Azure, then yeah, like a lot of QA, a lot of test, a lot of remote stuff. Kind of surprising there's only one RDP port open. Maybe that means that they have an SSL, or I'm sorry, a VPN set up. Test. Yeah. All this stuff tells me like UK Energy, UHF trading. Oh, that's interesting. That probably has to do with oil, buying and selling oil. Web app, webhook, web dev. Oh boy. Lots of staging. Yeah. And so we learned a lot today about Equinor, and we haven't even gotten to anything interesting yet. This is just subdomains. So we could go on at length, and we should, for the sake of argument. But yeah, so you can see how this gets very colorful very quickly. Like in a lot of cases, you can say all Jira. Nope. What about Confluence? So they have something that's Atlassian because it's in their DNS records. Maybe they did. Maybe they get a thumbs up because they didn't make it public. But yeah, so you can say, let's look at Equinor, and then, oh, it's choking. Okay, so they have their own network, and their network is oops. Let's see how big of a network they have. They have a /16. Okay. So we can just search for that /16 directly. And I bet this host name is, the host number is going to go up. Or maybe not. Look at that. Sometimes it does, because what you'll have happen is hosts that are in DNS aren't the full number of hosts that they have available. Look, they have a postfix server, mail wall. Yeah, so like IIS 10, that's good. Welcome XTQA. Cool, what are you? Let's go find out. Maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not. We have no idea. Oh, fantastic. This product is licensed from F5 Networks, copyright 1999 to 2 years ago. And that tells me they're not patching their F5s. So if we go and we see if there's any bugs in F5's network or F5's equipment between 2019 and now, chances are good that we might be able to do something terrible to this F5. But and this is how we move along. The other really interesting thing you can do is you can take this and say, let's do images. And images is for anybody that has a license. It's essentially the same result set, but it's only RDP and webcams. So now we can see, oh, that's good. We can search for their network in the images portion of Shodan and say, are there exposed cameras? Statoil is Equinor. They changed the company name. Oh, okay. Good to know. Yeah. So yeah, fun times. Fortunately, they don't have RDP exposed to the internet, I don't think. But yeah, and we could I could go on at length. But yeah, so their main 844. Ooh, hey. Secondary. Oh, that's good. When you get a handshake failure, that suggests that they're using 2A SSL. So they have a client certificate. And because Shodan's scanner doesn't have their client certificate, Equinor's end politely told Shodan to go away. 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay. 123 is NTP, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, this is interesting. I can't say for sure, but it is possible that there's a couple of different things you can do that's interesting when you find NTP exposed to the internet. One of them is similar to how DNS amplification attacks work. You can do the same thing with NTP. You can use NTP to amplify and denial of service flood people. So it is plausible, though. Again, if the context here is that we are doing a vendor security assessment on Equinor, we probably shouldn't actually try to exploit this. They'd probably get upset. But NTP is something that you could potentially use to do NTP. It's a reflection-based denial of service. So if you want to flood somebody and make it look like Equinor did it, this is a potential. I don't know what 5269 is. Oh, it's Jabber. Fantastic. You want to chat with them? It's funny. But yeah, so there's a lot of interesting, colorful stuff that you can do. Maybe I do need rum. Domino, Lotus Domino. That still exists. That's extranet. Their extranet runs on Domino. Why? Did they not know what year it is? Wow. That's time travel. That takes me back. 2001? The last time I saw Lotus in person was 2001. That's fantastic. Wow. But yeah, so you get the idea, right? Like we're starting to paint a picture. What they really like their Microsoft bar. Let's see what they're running for Apache. But we get a really good idea of like where they're strong, where they're weak. If we're going to go after them, what can we do? Other really fun stuff that I tend to do, because I've automated quite a lot of it, is screenshots. Like they have a /16, right? So you aim your favorite screenshot tool. Well, I mean, I guess first you'd nmap, or you'd get an export from Shodan of how many hosts are up, listing on 80 and 443 and 8443 and any other web ports, and then you run your screenshotter against them, and then you'd find pages and pages and pages of stuff. And a lot of times you'll find a lot more interesting stuff from the screenshots than you will from just looking at like text Shodan output. Like this, I don't know what this is, but we can have a look. Who knows? Like we're literally on Safari at the moment. Like no clue what we're going to find. Cool. Hi, I'm Vist. Oh God. Oh, all right. No. Fantastic. Great. All right. Good to know. So, oh, hey, look, test stuff. Yeah, this is how I end up staying up till 4 a.m. by mistake in a lot of cases. But yeah, so that's a pretty good idea of how to get a better idea of the risks that you will encounter when dealing with a given organization, beyond just asking them to please don't lie into the spreadsheet. So I have 14 minutes left, so we could do some Q&A. If you guys want to do some Q&A. Maybe? No? All right, well, I'll give folks a few minutes to start plugging questions into the chat, because I guess to do Q&A, I guess the way we have to do it is you're going to have to ask questions in the chat, and I'll have to try and keep up. What is your experience in translating this tech stuff into business? You're welcome. My experience in translating this into business is to, while I have my fun doing this part of stuff, I try and translate it into as plain of English as I can, because generally speaking, to the point of my slide deck, at the end of the day, my job, if I'm the one doing this assessment, is to simply explain go or no go. Do we elect to use the vendor, or do we not elect to use the vendor? So you could say, all we're doing with this company is we buy a barrel of oil from them a month. So their interesting findings on the perimeter are irrelevant to our business relationship with them. And if they experience a breach or a problem, it's not going to impact us negatively, because all we do is buy a barrel of oil from time to time. If the business relationship was more like, these people are our credit card processor, and we have 400,000 customers, and all of the 400,000 customers, when they renew their subscription to whatever goes through this company, maybe, if we're really intent on doing business with them, then we would say something like, it's important for us to consider what we found during the security assessment. Maybe we have some questions for them in terms of, can you describe for us what your security policies are like regarding these types of technologies? Or can you give us an example of what happened the last time you had a breach? Or can you walk us through your disaster recovery plan? Or you don't necessarily tell them up front, like, wow, your perimeter is terrible and we think the inside of the building might be on fire. That would probably scare them a little bit. But you phrase it in your polite sort of clinical business speak, and try and not keep the technical jargon to a minimum, right? So you basically say, look, we found some stuff. Some of the stuff we found is a little concerning. It's not a deal breaker, but we want to talk about it to make sure that we have a better understanding of what the reality is, because we did this in a vacuum. We looked at your perimeter. We looked at some findings on the internet. Some of the stuff is good. Some of the stuff is not so good. Let's have a discussion about it, right? Does that answer your question sufficiently, or should I keep going? Yeah. So the idea is that within the context of whatever this vendor is doing, you have to keep in mind that not everything you find is necessarily going to be a deal breaker for whatever the vendor is that you're like. Think of like Slack, for example. You want to use Slack as your company's internal chat mechanism. Well, what's going into Slack? Well, all the super private conversations between executive leadership and HR and all of security and all of IT. So all the secrets. Okay, well, we might want to investigate a little bit more deeply into like, what does Slack's backend look like? And, ask some more pointed questions. Or maybe if they release a version of Slack that allows you to have an on-premise version of the same, where you have a piece of equipment inside your infrastructure and you no longer have to deal with the potential risk of sending secrets over the wire to the internet to someone else's computer, right? So like when you establish an idea of sort of where your threat meter is in your own head, you can make a decision of, is this a deal breaker in its entirety, or can we have a deeper discussion about it? Or are there alternative vendors that do something similar that have less risk surfaces exposed or less potential liability or that sort of thing? So it's kind of an open-ended conversation. Again, it depends on sort of what you do for the organization and what your relationship is with your peers. Almost every single time I did a security assessment on a vendor, I think there may have been 2 where they actually listened to me. Every single one that I've done like this for places I've worked, they filled out that risk acceptance form and they're like, lol, thanks for the security work, hacker guy. Cool, bye. We'll talk to you like next time we need a thing. And they write it off because they say, well, it is a company policy that whatever new vendor is being onboarded gets a security assessment. And only after that security assessment is performed can a decision be made regarding either accepting the risk or canceling the contract or moving to a different vendor or changing the nature of the relationship or what have you. But in my experience, in almost every circumstance, they didn't care what the security results were. They already knew what they wanted to do, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to use the thing. So if security gave them a result that they didn't like, they just ignored it. Thanks. Why am I even here? What's the point? So next question. In your opinion, experience, when you're finding something really critical while browsing services like Shodan or Census, what is the best channel of reporting, especially when it is affecting private individuals? So within the context of at least the presentation, in terms of like if you're doing an assessment for a potential vendor that you intend to onboard for your company or your organization rather, it sort of depends on who they are and what you find. If that's one leg of discussion, or are you asking just generally speaking, if you find something, you happen to be on Safari looking at Shodan and you find a thing that suggests that the world is on fire, what do you do about it? So in the first case, if we're talking about the context is within the parameters of the discussion, which is you're doing an assessment for a vendor, or you're doing an assessment of a vendor for your organization, then ostensibly there is already some sort of communications channel open between you and them. In almost every circumstance, when security gets brought in to do one of these vendor assessments, it's because there's already a discussion happening. It's because people have already had meetings and they've already decided that they want to join forces or what have you. And the security component of it is more like a checkbox. It's a formality. So generally speaking, there'll be either somebody within the organization that is like the liaison if you want to make contact with the vendor, or in some cases you're that person. You have to make contact with the security department of the vendor and ask them these pointed questions. Because, like in my experience, one of the jobs that I had in the past, I think it was at Twitter, my job was actually to do the initial, the first contact of reaching out to the company and saying, "Hey, we're doing a security assessment of your organization. We're going to use you guys as a vendor. Is there somebody in your security team that I can talk to? Because I have some questions regarding, a variety of topics that is a prerequisite for our ability to use you as a vendor." On the latter side, if you just find random stuff on the internet, depending on who you ask, you will get wildly different responses. If you were to ask Twitter, just generally, just InfoSec Twitter, there would be people that would come to your house with pitchforks and torches if you didn't say, if your answer wasn't spend the next week of your life, every waking moment, trying to get a hold of every single possible human being that you possibly can to report it to anybody that will listen. If you ask other parts of Twitter, they'll say, well, maybe see if they have a security contact listed, or maybe see if they have a bug bounty program or a VDP program or some other official channel by which you can report problems, which is a sensible answer. But if you ask me, who has been down this road several times, and the story there is I found roads like billboards, like big LED billboards on freeways, huge mammoth displays, open on the internet, listening with VNC, and you could just connect to them and put whatever you wanted on the billboard, which is kind of amusing because in the talk that I did when I discovered those, I basically said, like, what happens if I just put like Ebola outbreak? Like, will people eat themselves? Will they go like raid the stores? Like, what happens? So in going to that company and saying, hey, I found several hundred of your billboards that are like publicly accessible on the internet, some in the US and some in Canada. This is potentially a terrible thing that people can use to in some case, maybe even get people killed. You should strongly consider changing how you approach remote access to these billboards, because this is just VNC floating out on the internet. And if you guess the password, which I did, it was the company's name, you can just get in. And they told me, go away, we don't care. So that's a lot of what you'll experience if you try and do the good internet Samaritan thing and you find a problem and you turn it in. It is a roll of the dice. Sometimes people will say, wow, thank you so much. Sometimes they'll say, go away. Sometimes there is nobody there to get a hold of. There just isn't somebody. They don't have a security team, or they don't care about security at all, or they have no interest in hearing from some random stranger on the internet. Or if they are particularly twitchy and litigious, they will threaten you with a lawsuit. They will claim that you're trying to hack them, and they will threaten to sue you. So the proper advice I should be giving to a crowd of people is check and see if there's some official reporting mechanism. See if they have a security.txt on their website. See if they have security people on LinkedIn, or if there's an equivalent in Norway of LinkedIn. Spend 5 minutes, and if in 5 minutes you can't find somebody who you can report it to, just don't bother. Because if there isn't somebody, like if the company was intentionally, like if they made it clear that they were willing to hear opinions of people, then they would provide an avenue for that. There'd be a contact or a forum or like security people or what have you. But if there is no way to get a hold of them, the chances are really good that if there is not an established channel by which to make contact with the security people there, you're gonna have problems. It'll be bad. But yeah, if you look for my name on YouTube, you'll find it. There's a talk that I did at 44Con several years ago that covers responsible disclosure. And I have a minute left. If I can get one more quick question in, maybe just some flailing and profanities. That is correct. Many companies do have big bounty programs, but not all of them. And some people will get really upset if you try to submit a bug to them that you found and you don't do it through their bug bounty program. So just some fun stuff to consider. Yeah, happy to help. And I guess with that, I'll turn over the last 30 seconds back to the conference.
Thank you, Dan. And Håkon would like to thank Dan for this great talk and the live recon mission. That was excellent.
Oh yeah, doing it live is the best.
Yeah, we really appreciate that you took the time to show us this.
Yeah,
and I guess we all got some new ideas on how we could make things exposed on the internet a little more secure now.
Yeah, just pull plug, or put them behind a firewall, put them behind a VPN, something. Just don't let me find them.
Secure them. That's the most important thing. thanks for us. And thank you
you're
again,
very
Dan.
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Excellent audience. And Dan, you're great as always.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Have a good conference, folks.